Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Lindsay. I'm a former resident of the Eastlake neighborhood. I lived just 2 blocks away on Franklin Avenue East. I'm a proud father of 2 young girls, and I am the former public safety advisor to the mayor of Seattle. I'm running for office because for the last 3 years, I worked to solve some of the tough challenges facing Seattle. You know, Seattle has one of the highest per capita property crime rates in the city. We are struggling with a serious heroin epidemic, and of course, what we all see every day, a major homelessness crisis. I was known in City Hall for coming up with innovative solutions to take some of these challenges on. I helped create the navigation team, which paired outreach workers and police officers for the first time together to go out and do outreach to folks who are struggling in vulnerable situations, including just blocks away from here. I also helped create the Heroin and Opiate Addiction Task Force. So I dove deep into those issues. I worked with behavioral health specialists, with firefighters, with public safety officers around the city and around the county to take on the heroin epidemic. But I also struggled and grew frustrated. I saw that the criminal justice system is actually not working in sync with our public safety officers, with our firefighters, with our behavioral health specialists. Unfortunately, the vast majority of repeat offenders who are in that system right now are struggling with addiction and homelessness. These are folks who are being prosecuted right now as we speak by the city attorney's office. They're getting arrested, they're going through the jail system, they're going through the court system, and yet we're failing to offer interventions that would actually change the course of their behavior. We're failing to offer the interventions for treatment programs or social services. This is why I have the endorsement of the Seattle Times, the Seattle Firefighters Union, community leaders throughout the city, and all 5 current and past co-chairs of Community Police Commission, because I am ready to step in with innovative solutions to these significant challenges.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for hosting this forum. I've really looked forward to it. I'm Pete Holmes, your city attorney. I'm serving in the last year of my 2nd term. And one of the interesting things about this, I like to say after a 33-year legal career, that this is the hardest job, the hardest law job I have ever had in that career, and it's the one that I absolutely love the most. I ran for this position first 8 years ago with things to accomplish, and I did those and more. I have not let up 1 second. I am a firm believer in the rule of law, and on behalf of the city of Seattle, the mantra in the law department for your law department is the rule of law. And I wanted to, since this is a special forum for me as well, I also wanted to give a little bit more background about why in particular environmental issues and the like are so important to me. I grew up on a small farm in Virginia. I too am a proud parent of 2 children. They're both grown native Seattleites, but I moved here from Virginia with my wife. And on that farm, my father was a professional forester, later worked for the National Audubon Society Nature Center's Planning Division, and it was little wonder that I then went on to study energy and environmental science at Yale, went on to get my law degree after 3 years at the Natural Resources Defense Council and doing endangered species work for Defenders of Wildlife. So in a lot of ways, I thought I would have that environmental career, but instead found that the path to making lives better for everyone, including our environment, is the rule of law. And so with that, I look forward to this opportunity to tell you some of the amazing advances that we have accomplished for you in the last 8 years. It's a long list. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask the first question, and then we'll turn to Richard for the next one. During most of Seattle's history, citizens had access to the law department's opinions, except regarding pending lawsuits, to the extent that they were even published in bound volumes. In recent decades, city attorneys have asserted sweeping restrictions on sharing such information based on attorney-client privilege, and have denied the public the value of the law department's analysis, even to the point when some years ago when an amendment was proposed to the city charter to institute access to the city attorney's opinions and not to have the attorney-client privilege be such a barrier. A request for that, the analysis that the city attorney's office had done was denied under the Public Records Act because the claim was that it was attorney-client privileged. Would you support and perhaps explain yes or no why reinstituting access by the public to the legal opinions of the law department? Would one of you like to answer?
Yeah, I'll take the first crack. I actually totally agree. There's a real challenge here. You know, the Attorney General of the state of Washington actually issues Attorney General opinion orders, sometimes dozens, even hundreds per year. These provide transparency as to the Attorney General's official opinion on important matters of legal significance to all residents of the state of Washington. I actually think the city attorney of the city of Seattle is an elected city attorney for a reason. This position should represent all 700,000 residents of the city, not just the 9 elected council members and the 1 mayor. Right? As city attorney, I would want to bring greater transparency. There is, of course, a time and a place for attorney-client privilege communications specific to council members or the mayors or a department. But there is also a time and a place where it's important to bring transparency for the city attorney to represent the residents of the city and weigh in on matters of significant legal importance.
Thanks for the question, Chris. I don't know the specific request that you're talking about, and I don't know the date, if it happened in my term or not. It was prior to me, so I just wanted to make clear. The Attorney General does indeed release public opinions, and that's because the Attorney General is specifically authorized in the Revised Code of Washington to do so. There is no specific authority for the city attorney in Seattle. However, this is something that I have wanted to do from the very beginning. The practice of producing city attorney opinions was discontinued by Mark Sidran. That's 2 city attorneys ago. It was never picked up again by Tom Carr, whom I followed. And in my office, we have actually drafted an ordinance that, like the RCW gives to the Attorney General, would give to my office. There is one big problem, and that is when we say attorney-client privilege, it's owned by the mayor or the council or whatever, and therefore it's difficult for a lawyer following the ethical rules to unilaterally waive a privilege. That has to have buy-in from the rest of the city government. Notwithstanding that, I have at every opportunity offered public opinions, sometimes pre-ballot opinions on, for instance, initiatives.
Thank you. Welcome, Scott and Pete. Next question. Why don't we have Pete answer this one first? As Seattle strives to more effectively respond to the homelessness and drug crises, our parks, trails, and informal green belts are really taking a beating with human wastes, impacts to plants, and decreased public safety. How will you better protect our public green spaces and lead accountability and effectiveness on this? Thanks for the question. The city attorney provides a supporting role, if you will, in these instances where the executive is the entity charged with making sure that enforcement actions are taken. We are there to help advise what is legal, and then, of course, as the misdemeanor prosecutor, should a criminal charge be brought, those have to come to our office for that. But more broadly, what we have to do in our office is to help this city find the resources that are so desperately needed. It really has to be, you're describing a public health problem that nonetheless does have these impacts on all of us, whether it's a homeless, unauthorized encampment or the impacts on the trails that you're talking about. What I have done in my office, for instance, last week, Attorney General Ferguson and I filed lawsuits against opioid manufacturers that are driving a lot of the homeless problem that you see. We want to hold those manufacturers accountable. That is a way of getting needed resources to the city, and that's an appropriate role for the city attorney. That is but one example, and having to wrap up, I look forward to talking more after the meeting.
Well, I've actually got a real track record of action here. I helped create the navigation team, as I mentioned earlier, which actually, again, paired outreach workers, with police officers, with treatment programs, with specialized shelter opportunities to actually go out, do the outreach, and get people out of some of these really dangerous and hazardous and unhealthy conditions. I personally led the navigation team, saw the devastation that many encampments had on the natural environment, the devastation that many encampments had on some of the safety of neighborhoods throughout the city, and the safety of the residents in these areas. I think we need to do more to help people out of these situations. And again, that's why I have a track record of success. I think the city attorney's office actually should play more than just a supporting role here. The city attorney is charged as the chief legal officer with being the chief legal officer of the city of Seattle. The city attorney can be the main problem solver for some of these challenges, can spearhead how we take on these challenges in terms of managing the public realm, managing our public space.
There is much discussion at the federal, state, and local levels about the need for criminal justice reform. What, if anything, would you do as city attorney on this issue?
So I think this is the principal reason that I am running for office. Very sadly, Seattle is a leader in so many areas, and yet we are 10 to 20 years behind our peer cities in core criminal justice reform issues. Right now, so many of our fellow residents are in the criminal justice system when they really need to be receiving treatment options, behavioral health interjections, and social services. Residents who are just blocks above here, living right along I-5 in dangerous conditions, who are also involved in the criminal justice system. We need to do more to break them out. So let's have a specific plan. First, proactive teams that go out and engage them where we know that they're living, like the navigation team. Second, diversion programs. We know that the LEAD program, which we've piloted downtown and now in Capitol Hill for the last 5 years, actually works. Let's expand that citywide. Then we need serious alternative courts. You know, the community court died and was closed down last year. We need real alternative courts, and we need significant reentry programs. So we are breaking the streets to jail cycle that is so impacting our city right now.
I hope that we will continue to have discussion about criminal justice reform under the present federal administration. I'm worried that in some respects, a lot of what we have to do is to try and make sure that we hold and not lose the ground gained over the last several years. Scott's right, the LEAD program is an example of one of those programs that can help solve these problems, particularly when they are public health in origin. That's why I co-founded LEAD back in 2011. And it is a good, remarkable program. But it is not the panacea. It's not the answer to everything. And in fact, we need to bring more comprehensive programs whenever we can. The problem is, as you heard with Scott, is that these are often executive functions, and that's exactly what he was doing for 3 years, and he accomplished whatever he accomplished in 3 years. And so the notion that you're going to leave the executive and come to the city attorney and accomplish more is something that needs some further elaboration. But in my office, criminal justice reform has been the hallmark. Drug policy reform, police reform. We have been moving the dial, and we are the leader. Thank you.
Scott, I'll pass this one to you then. Seattle is losing many of its biggest trees in development, as many loopholes in the interim tree ordinance allows for their removal. Do you support giving greater protection to heritage and exceptional trees? If so, how that might be accomplished?
Thank you, and it's a great question. You know, just on Saturday, I took my 2 young daughters on a hike through the Madrona Ravine. And right before we came upon the ravine, we walked by a heritage tree. And I want to read, there was a plaque that said it was a giant sequoia. It said, "The big tree is nature's forest masterpiece, and so far as I know, the greatest of living things." That's by John Muir. I completely agree. We need to do so much more, and the thought to me that heritage tree, that giant sequoia, could someday come down because of development was a tragic thought that really focused my mind around tonight's discussion. We can do more to protect our tree canopy. We can do more to protect heritage trees, in particular, exceptional trees. And I think and agree with the city attorney that we need to step up and really take action where those trees come under threat.
I certainly support protection for heritage trees, and we have a unit in my office that's now a little over 2 years old that is exactly the kind of response the city attorney can provide to make sure that we're enforcing. It's called REACH, Regulatory Enforcement and Economic Justice. This is a team of lawyers when it's not appropriate that you have a criminal sanction, but on the other hand, a lawsuit is out of the question. And so what we do is to pair up with our regulators. Those guys that go out with code compliance, whether it's a building code or actually someone that has taken down a tree. You know, we have, they basically team up with our lawyers and they make sure that we're applying the right remedy and getting code compliance. We try first to get voluntary compliance. If that doesn't work, then we go for regulatory enforcement. But trees are critical. We know that they are an answer. They fix carbon. They provide cooling and shade. And we must do more to protect them. I'm fortunate to live with large trees in my backyard, and believe me, they are a joy, and I will do everything that I can to help protect our canopy. We really need to enforce, and some of those forestry practices, by the way, we'll make sure that we can even go back an earlier question and figure out when a tree's been cut down, what was its value.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't. Okay, next question. Current Seattle City policy allows automatic erasure of most emails after 60 days, and that's in contrast to what Pierce County government does, where they ensure that documents are kept for 4 years, which is the statute of limitation for felonies. And that means that if there is any wrongdoing that might be in these emails, we won't even know about it until long after they were destroyed. Would you support substantially lengthening, possibly up to 4 years, the amount of time that the city preserves emails and other documents before they're destroyed? Whichever one of you, yeah.
Sure. Just very quickly, of course, we want to preserve records as long as we can. It does lend itself to a practical problem. If you start to look at what terabytes of data look like, and imagine with the 12,000 employees and in the city and all the constituents among the 700,000 residents, just imagine on a daily basis what kind of volume we're generating in emails. Ironically, as a practical matter in my office, since we're on litigation hold all the time, every email I've done since I've been in office still is in existence and is still reserved. So I think that we have to find that balance. That is an executive question to figure out the resources, how much do we need in server space, but there is a practical balance. It's not unlike when we talk about body cams. These are great pieces of data, but how do you store them all? How do you access them? How do you get to them? So there's both a practical dimension as well as the legal one.
Yeah, I would support storing emails for longer periods, but I think there's a more important point here. And I was in city government for the last 3 years. My experience wasn't just that it's not the emails, it's we need to do much more for government transparency overall. Every department, every office, the city attorney's office needs to do much more to be transparent up front. We shouldn't require a citizen request, a public disclosure request, for to sort through emails to actually understand what's going on with our government. How are they contracting? How are they performing? What performance metrics are they putting in place? Those are the kind of things that I think really aid government transparency the most.
The Seattle City Council created the Seattle Urban Forestry Commission, but rarely consults with them on issues, including updating the interim tree ordinance. Is there any obligation on the part of the City Council to seek and follow the Commission's recommendations?
I'm not familiar with the ordinance, any specific obligations. You know, we have so many boards and commissions. You would like to think that they are there to serve a purpose, and you know, this commission in particular is staffed with lots of forestry professionals, and we certainly should be consulting them more. I know several of them. I can tell you that I've hired at least 2 of them to be expert witnesses, for instance, in our Seattle tree cutting case, so in West Seattle. So we certainly should be, and I apologize, I don't know the specific language and how often they would be required to consult them. We certainly should I mean, it's like a planning commission or a historic landmarks commission. We have all these specialty commissions, hundreds of them, and they have expertise that lawmakers should utilize, and this is no exception.
If we're going to ask citizens to join a commission and to do the work, we need to listen, period. And particularly with an area that requires real expertise, like our urban canopy, forest canopy, and the management of our urban forest, we need the input of true experts. We don't have those experts on council. We don't have those experts in the city attorney's office, in SDCI, and SDOT. We need to get that input in, and it should be formalized. I had the privilege of working with some of the folks who help manage our green space, our public green space, from the Parks Department, from SDOT, from SDCI, and know that these are, for the most part, well-meaning folks, but they need support, they need aid, and I think we can do a lot more to bring that to them.
I think we have time for one more question each. Yeah. So, in your proposed strategy for addressing prostitution, how do you balance increased enforcement efforts with impacts on undocumented immigrants who might be vulnerable to deportation?
Yeah, well, Mr. Holmes and I have some strong differences here. And here's what we're talking about for some of you who might not be fully up to speed, Rich. Seattle is a major hub of human trafficking and sexual exploitation right now. That is a terrible and tragic reality, and it has been growing. Mr. Holmes and I agree that we need to shift our strategy from focusing on prostitutes to focusing on Johns. But unfortunately, that strategy, that shift, which has been in place for the last several years, has been poorly implemented, and we've seen a significant growth in the amount of sexual exploitation in this city, all around this city. But there's one more troubling element, and the Stranger reported on this just 2 weeks ago, and I wish you'd take a look, which is that the city attorney's office has said that it has a policy that it will not negotiate down in cases where there are strong immigration consequences. That's very concerning to me, and I note that one of the key heads of the Public Defender Association said that was, quote, insane and, in her words, illegal. I think we can do better. I think we can be flexible in cases where there are significant immigration consequences, and I'd like to see a change there.
Thanks again for the question. And this is an extremely important public policy. It's one that I inaugurated early in my first term. When I took office, this city, like most cities, attacked the problem of prostitution by going after the supply side, by further victimizing women in the life who themselves truly were victims. I knew that had to change. Believe me, the women that we saw in our courtrooms were themselves in need of services, in need of assistance. And so we focused in line with the best teaching that we go for the demand side. We have to hold sex buyers accountable for driving the commercial sex industry that in turn is driving most of human trafficking. That has been our policy. It is in alignment with the county and with other cities such as Bellevue. We also have the Sheriff's Office and SPD on. So on this immigration issue, we have been absolutely open and have listened to lawyers for immigration communities. We have a fundamental disagreement. It only takes a second violation for sex buying before you can be subject to deportation under federal law. The first one will not get you deported, and I'm sorry. I lose sympathy on the second one. If you haven't learned, then I'm sorry. That's your fault.
Thank you. This is what I'm calling the Catch-22 news. Last month in September in Ballard, a 40-inch diameter they measured as diameter of breast height, so it sort of measures right here. Exceptional evergreen tree was cut down without a permit after new neighbors complained to the landlord next door that the pine cones were dropping on their yard. A citizen filed a complaint, but then the city inspector came out and said that since the tree is no longer there and the remaining stump was shorter than 4.5 feet high, they could no longer prove that this tree was greater than 30 inches diameter of breast height. because the law required that it be measured at 4.5 feet height, regardless of how wide the stump was. The complaint was not followed up on, and there was no penalty for removal. We are stumped. What can the city attorney do or recommend to the city council to halt unnecessary exceptional tree removal?
I mean, that's just outrageous, right? And we're just going to, I think, agree here completely. That's outrageous, and I've unfortunately experienced this myself, not specific to that, but dealing with sometimes, city bureaucrats who want to read the letter of the law. We need problem solvers. We need folks who understand the spirit and intent of the law, and if we need to change the law to get them to do that, then we'll change the law, and we should. But I also think that it takes some real leadership from our executive departments to get that right. That needs to be cleaned up real quick.
Yeah, I do think there should be some follow-up with that department to investigate what happened, because talk about someone who really needed to consult with that Urban Forestry Commission. Here's one right there, because those guys could have told him. I used to, as a child, go with my father, the forester, when he was hired. You would have a clear cut that was illegal. It went over on someone else's property. A good forester knows exactly how to identify by stumpage what the species is, what the size of it was, and what the commercial value of it was. It's exactly what we did when we went after those West Seattle tree cutters. We used professional arborists who could get in there and tell us, here's the value. It is tragic that this inspector did not understand that basic thing. If it had come to our office, we absolutely would have contacted the right experts.
Thank you. So each candidate now has 2 minutes each to wind up. Who wants to go first?
Again, my name is Scott Lindsay. I think that Seattle actually needs a change. Mr. Holmes has been in office for 8 years, and Seattle has struggled with key criminal justice reform and has actually, unfortunately, also struggled this year with a record $13 million deficit in the red from our Judgment and Claims Fund, which is managed by the City Attorney's Office. The City Budget Office called that one of the single biggest challenges that they're facing this year in terms of coming up with the funding for other programs like homelessness, and I think we can do better. The status quo in Seattle right now is not working on criminal justice issues. Police officers are not getting the support that they need from our criminal justice system. Our criminal justice system needs to actually be a progressive model that introduces true behavioral health interventions to folks who need it and diverts others out to get, again, the treatment and services they need. I had lunch 2 months ago with one of the police officers who works the beat that includes the Pocock Center right here. He said that almost every single one of the cases that he was working here in the Eastlake neighborhood, and this is true in so many neighborhoods around the city, revolve around addiction, heroin addiction. So what is the city of Seattle doing? I was on the inside. I was one staffer in the mayor's office when there was one public safety advisor. The city attorney's office has 200 attorneys and staff and is charged with protecting the public safety of the city of Seattle and criminal justice reform. That is a major platform, and we are not taking advantage of that fantastic opportunity. As city attorney, I have a plan to reform our criminal justice system and improve public safety. The Seattle Times endorsed me for that plan. The Seattle Firefighters Union has endorsed me for that plan, and police reform advocates around this city have endorsed me for that plan. I think it's time for a change, and I hope you'll give me that chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you again for hosting this forum. Yes, I'm Pete Holmes, and I believe that a third term is more important now than ever. Seattle is really at a crossroads. Not only do we have national and international tensions, but here in this second term, I am already on my fourth mayor. I'm on my fourth police chief. I'm on my third fire chief. And by January 1st, by the time the election this year is certified, more than half of the city council will be in their first terms. Suddenly I'm feeling very old. But what I do feel and what I do love about this job is that the experience that's required to be that center of gravity, to provide that advice to my fellow electeds, to those department heads, to try and do a better job, to get this right, to pull together, now it's more important than ever. I will be on my 5th mayor, by the way, before the end of this term. And I need to be there to transition that new mayor, to be able to make sure that this city continues to move forward with its progressive values. I have found that my values and the way I apply the rule of law so well fits this progressive city. We are pushing the envelope on so many things, from the minimum wage, from the new millionaire's income tax. We just filed a brief on that. We are going to be championing new concepts and plowing new ground that the lawyers, the 102 lawyers who look to me for leadership every day, are really making law, and they are advancing this city's interests. I live and breathe this job. This is the most amazing law job on the planet because it is the most amazing city on the planet. And now more than ever, even 8 years ago, and I do appreciate the opportunity to tell you about what we've been doing for these 8 years. Even more than 8 years ago, I'm the man for this job, and I want to continue serving you, the people of Seattle.